It is 10 minutes after 11 o'clock, and we talked a little bit about last hour. I have with me a gentleman on the phone who ran the original roller derby. Now, we're talking the stuff that happened in the 50s, the 60s, and, of course, yes, into the 70s. His father was the actual inventor of the roller derby. We're talking about Leo Seltzer back on August 13th, 1935. And I have with me on the phone Jerry Seltzer from his home down in the Bay Area. Good morning, Jerry. How are you?
I'm fine. I mean, it just... when a legend who just surprises you, and not that being surprised is the main thing here, but the sudden passing of somebody who, hasn't been ill and then suddenly is gone, and yet had so much to do with the great appreciation and creation of the game. That's about all I can think about this morning is Charlie O'Connell's passing. And, of course, I think I've heard from everybody that I know. And what amazes me, Terry, is how many of the modern roller derby people, some disdain having anything to do with the former game. Some of the local teams in Oregon, I understand, don't even try and seek out the help of somebody who would really help them.
Right.
But so many are fascinated with the history of the game. And they know Charlie O'Connell, and they knew Joan Weston, and they knew Annis Jensen, but it's just been that day, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling.
Well, I woke up this morning, and the first thing I do when I get up, like everybody else, is I check email and Facebook and all that other stuff, and I start preparing for today's show. And one of our mutual friends, Jim Fitzpatrick, had sent me an email saying that Charlie O'Connell had passed away. And I immediately started going through different things, old championship playoff yearbooks, things, and I came across one that was from the 23rd championship playoffs. It goes back to 1971, and it opened. I opened up the front cover, Jerry, and the very first thing that you had written in there is "All good things must someday come to an end," and so it is with the tenure of the great one, Charlie O'Connell. And I thought, wow. Charlie, as for me, Jerry, as a young child growing up, I grew up in the 60s. I would go down to the San Jose Civic every Monday night and watch your roller derby with the Bombers and whoever else. And Charlie was always, my hero growing up. And he was kind of like Elvis. He was always there. Charlie O'Connell was always there. And today, to read that, it's like I feel like I've lost a member of my family.
Well, I think that's just so much, and the response that everybody is getting, it's taken away, as you say, a part of their childhood, a part of their life. You're talking about a man who changed the game by himself. He, unlike so many of our players, was an athlete, a football player. He played hockey, who came out of that wonderful training school in New York run by Jerry Murray. And he was part of a group that included Nick Scopus and Frank Macedo and a bunch of others who just, made so much of the roller derby. And so Charlie only knew one way to play. You skate fast, you skate hard. If you come near me, you're going to get hit. If you're foolish enough to get in a fight with me, you're going to be bloody and bowed. And he understood the game as so few ever have. And, the position of pivot was virtually created for him. The one player who could do everything. He could jam, he could block, he could know where to position. And for a man of 6'2", 190 pounds, he had tremendous speed and power. And that is really what made the game so amazing. And I would just kind of stand back. Dealing with Charlie was never easy.
I know that.
The fans who loved him And he would come in the arena, did not want to sign any autographs, talk to anybody, never wanted to make any kind of personal appearance. And he said, I'm here to skate, period. And he earned the respect of anybody who ever skated. And, of course, everybody wanted to emulate him. And as I say, that gave us such a fast, hard-hitting game. And when you had Joan Weston on the other side, leading the women's field, two larger-than-life figures, that I just can't say what it meant, and it's still hard for me to believe it that he is gone.
Right. When Charlie skated against an opponent, and I talked with Bill Grohl, who skated against Charlie for many, many, many years, has skated as well as with Charlie for many years. He said that when Charlie would hit you, you knew you were hit. You knew that when Charlie clobbered you, you knew you were hit. But yet there were some skaters that could not be intimidated by Charlie. And I mean, instantly I think of the great Ken Monty, Bob Woodbury. They would go toe-to-toe with O'Connell.
And the best, of course, was Ken Monty. And Ken Monty was from a few years earlier. It's hard to believe he wasn't really at his peak when he skated with the Red Devils against O'Connell. But when those two went at it, and people say, "Well, what about those fights?" We hated the fights. People can't understand that. To have color in the game and to have people facing off, and the almost that really sold the game. But the fights just brought about too many injuries, and if a fight involved O'Connell, you knew somebody was going to get hurt.
Now Charlie's
one game, he actually broke his wrist in a fight.
Wow.
Something that really was unnecessary. So what did he do? He didn't stop skating. He just got a very heavy-duty cast, which he used to his advantage when skating. And it's just hard to describe O'Connell in a few words.
I understand him and Bob Woodbury, who's one of the greatest, I thought, as well, got into some game someplace, and Charlie received a concussion. Is that correct?
Well, we didn't know till afterwards, because after the game, I went to talk to him, and I said, "You skated a hell of a second half," and he just looked at me, and funny, and later he did not remember the game at all.
Wow.
So he was operating from reflexes, and our helmets, I have to say, you look at the equipment that is worn now, the knee pads, the elbow, all of the protection that's worn. Well, our skaters had uniforms that and tights. The one thing that we did have that I wish they did now was built-in butt pads, because the cock is a terrible thing to break. Mm-hmm. But our helmets were basically helmets that construction workers use and were virtually useless. We used them to designate the position of a player. That was the main thing our helmets did. The equipment really wasn't sufficient, because that game was so much more hard-hitting and so much action and skating, which unfortunately a lot of people feel is kind of gone from today's game.
We're, of course, talking with Jerry Seltzer, who ran the roller derby during the 1950s, 60s, and the 70s. And we're talking, of course, about the passing of the great Charlie O'Connell, who passed away earlier this week. Charlie didn't like the fame, did he, Jerry? He really wasn't a big fan of the fame. You mentioned earlier he didn't like to do the interviews and make appearances. He really didn't like the fame, did he?
I don't know if you'd say that. He kind of looked at it as an unnecessary evil, Last night I watched a very tired basketball player for the Warriors, and they've been through, a terrible road trip, and I was just amazed that he had the patience to stand there and talk and everything, knowing that Charlie had passed. And I was thinking about that. I thought, Charlie would have turned with disdain, spat, and walked away. It's just what it was. But he had the talent to back it up.
Mm-hmm.
And we had sense enough really not to try and book him on a lot of shows and interviews. It was always Covello or Weston or Tony Roman or somebody else on the Bombers, because Charlie just didn't want to do it.
Now, I talked a few years ago with a friend of mine that I managed to become friends with over the years, the great Walt Harris, who was your television announcer. And
Right.
he would say how Charlie would not do a lot of interviews, but he never turned down Walt's interview. He loved talking with Walt.
Yeah, but see, Walt knew how to talk to him. And, and he knew that Walt is Derby, that Walt would never... so many announcers, and I've seen this, and maybe it's because they're not athletes themselves, but they often feel that by putting a player down, that they're somehow building themselves up. And Walt never did that. He was the consummate help for roller derby.
Yeah, and Walt was also one of the nicest guys you've ever met, too.
Of course.
So let's talk about a particular game, Jerry. As you know, because you ran roller derby for so many years, but for the fans that don't know, no roller derby game can end in a tie. If at the end of regulation time the score is tied up, you have what is called a sudden death. Now, the way the sudden death works is that the girls would come back on, and they will skate for 5 minutes. The very first point scored wins the game. Well, at the end of that 5 minutes, if there is no score, then the guys will come back on. And again, the first point wins the game. If at the end of that 5 minutes, well, then the girls come back on. Jerry, tell me about this game in Petaluma.
Well, first of all, it was one of those kind of games that the skaters absolutely hated. And
why is that?
Well, Petaluma, California, a very nice town, by the way, at one time known as the chicken capital of the West, is in the summer it's very pleasant. At the night it gets very, very cool and windy, and we played at the fairgrounds. And
this was outdoors?
It was definitely outdoors,
Okay.
in front of the grandstand. And people say, well, we thought roller derby always had huge crowds. We did. But to sustain a week where we needed that fifth or sixth game, we would alternate between places like Santa Rosa and Antioch. And, this was the big leagues coming to their town. So we knew we'd get, great attendance. So this particular night was cold, windy. The game ends in a dead heat. So Charlie, I think he had someplace to go. He is about to, he turns it over to Covello, who was the women's captain at that time, and who had recently broken up with Charlie. Now, a lot of teams don't have those problems. Maybe they do more now that that
right.
Things are open. But I mean, men and women on the same team, and he turned over to her and he said, "Finish this as fast as you can." So she turned to her girls and said, "We're not going to score, and I don't want you to let anybody score." And they looked at her in puzzlement. So some of the guys had started to leave the track and everything, and of course, there was no points in that overtime. And so the men came back on. Charlie, very unhappy. He gives the same orders. You are not to score. Nobody's to score. I wish I could tell you exactly how many overtimes it went. There wasn't a person left in the stand. It was 1 or 2 in the morning. If you asked me who won, I couldn't tell you. But after an inordinate amount of overtimes, and I would have to say that is a game that was decided by a broken relationship.
Ann Calvello, I did an interview with her years ago before she passed away, and she was telling me about that game, and she said that it went 19 overtimes, is what she told me.
I was thinking it was 20, but yeah, you're right.
And she also said that it was the guys that finally gave in. She says the girls were not going to give in.
Right.
That's crazy.
And people are confused. Today it's primarily women roller derby, which is a lot more. It's a lot more. I want to say this carefully, like a rugby scrum, where generally there's one player who jams, and if they get out, they go around and around, and. I have to say it's obviously not the same game. Speed and hard blocking, and all participating. And now there's about over 100 men's leagues that have come in, and now there's co-ed roller derby. Well, we were not co-ed roller derby. Co-ed roller derby, in some areas as is played, is men and women as a mixed team. Mm-hmm. Of course, our games were 8 12-minute periods. The women skated 12 minutes against the other women's team, and the men did back and forth. So at the end of the 8th period, the cumulative score was the score of the game, which meant that the women and men were equally important. But we never really wanted them to skate against each other. And it was, they were almost run like separate empires. When Joni was the captain, she ran the girls' field. Charlie obviously ran the men's field, and you had that same situation with all the coaches and captains. Ironically, we never had a woman coach, which tells you the difference between 1970 and today. Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. I heard from one of the other great names in roller derby, of course, is the Atkinson family. There's so many different generations of Atkinsons, and I heard from Buddy Atkinson Jr. this morning, and he says, and I quote here, says, I am sad and I have an empty place in my heart on hearing that Charlie O'Connell has passed away. Charlie was one of my favorite skaters from that era that I performed in. Skating with Charlie always made you better and instilled a desire to bring your best to the games. There are so many great Charlie O stories, and none compare to his greatness on the bank track and his ability to make everyone want to see him and see what magic he did during those special moments. I say goodbye to a brother who was one of my idols, and I send him my love. Thank you for all the good times. These moments will always be with us. It's amazing, Jerry, how the skaters that he skated against still idolized him as well as the fans did.
And he punished them.
Yes,
I mean,
that's right.
It wasn't as though he gave them a smile. And if they came, I got today from a skater really that I barely remembered, and it was just a wonderful tribute. And he said, and the first time I was on the track and I was on a jam, and I looked straight ahead and saw that it was Charlie O'Connell who was dropping back to block, and I knew I was going to hurt, and I did.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Jerry, how did you find out that Charlie had passed?
Actually, from Gary Powers, mm-hmm. And apparently, I do not have the whole story. There would apparently. His impression was it was a sudden, unexpected heart attack. Charlie was 3 months from being 80 years of age.
Right.
But really, I don't think they were living between, I would like to say, the Gold Country in Northern California, and then in winter they would go down, he and Judy would go down to Palm Springs. And he played a lot of golf and all down there, and apparently that's where they were. Obviously, we'll all know more when we, get the report. But Judy is is very, very, very upset, as might be expected.
Sure. When was the last time you talked to Charlie? Did you stay in contact with him after you shut down the Derby?
No, not much, because
he didn't talk to anybody. We know that.
Well, it just kind of moved out of the realm. I mean, a lot of people picture me as, just being roller derby forever. Well, my roller derby life ended in 1973. And after that, I moved on to computerized ticketing and eventually became vice president of Ticketmaster. And today, my employers will kill me if I don't mention I'm with Brown Paper Tickets, who represents more of the roller derby leagues around the world than anybody. And have the unofficial title of the commissioner, which is very good for somebody my age to have all of these wonderful athletes at least know who I am.
Nice.
So there were many, many years that passed, and with really very few exceptions, I kind of lost track with a lot of people. I'm still in contact with Loretta Behrens, with Frank Macedo, Cliff Butler, Margie Laszlo, not too many more.
Now, we just recently lost, a couple of weeks ago, one of the original women's captains of the San Francisco Bay Bombers, the great Annis Big Red Jensen.
Yeah, Annis Big Red Jensen, and that's funny because she was just about 5 feet tall.
But nobody ever told her that,
though.
Very,
very big. And her daughter, Barbara, who came on and skated with Joni, for the Bombers. Ours was such a family thing. The Gammons, the Atkinsons,
the Romans.
And it even goes further back to the prior generations. Jerry Murray and her son Mike Gammon. These are all. It's hard to describe the roller derby of that era to anybody today, because it's almost unlike anything.
The very first celebrity I ever met at 7 years old was Annis Jensen, and I met her at the San Jose Ballpark. Every year at the San Jose Ballpark at Labor Day, you would have the annual roller derby picnic, which the skaters would come out there on the field, and the fans were allowed to come out there in the field, and they would have a picnic. And then there would be a softball game, and then, of course, the roller derby game. And the very first celebrity ever met was Annis Jensen, and my mom had an old 8mm. I still have the tape, and she's saying, "Stand next to Annis." And Annis, of course, put her arm around me and was just as friendly as could be. I was in love. At 7 years old, I was in love, Jerry. She was Annis Jensen, my first roller derby crush. But that same day, Charlie came out, and he was playing the softball game, and he sat next to me after he hit a home run, and I'm 7 years old, and I have this on videotape where I'm just sitting there in awe, staring at the great Charlie O'Connell.
Oh, my.
It was just amazing. And Jerry, real quickly here, because I know we're running low on time here, but talk about your fans. The roller derby fans, they were unbelievable. They were unbelievable. If they loved you, they loved you. And if they didn't, you heard about it.
You bet. Oh, yeah. If they didn't like a referee's decision, of course, I got in trouble. And, I know we've said this enough times. And this is an amazing year for roller derby because it's the 80th anniversary on August 13th.
August 13th, right.
And roller derby was invented by an Oregonian.
Your daddy.
Yeah, Leo Seltzer from Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
And obviously that's where I'm from also.
You also have a park named after you up here in Oregon that I went to last year, my wife and I did, called the Seltzer Park.
Right. That was land that our family owned in Seaside, Oregon. Mm-hmm. So if anybody goes down to the Cove and goes along the drive there, you'll see this small park on the left with hot showers for the surfers and a great place to look at the ocean. And that was a piece of the property that my father had really bought way back in 1939, 1940. And it's dedicated to Leo and Oscar Seltzer.
Nice.
So go sit on a bench there and take a look at the Pacific Ocean.
I'm telling you, my wife and I did that last year, and we sat there for hours and it's such a beautiful sight. It's up along a little bit on a hill, and it's just a beautiful view of the ocean there. But Jerry, my friend, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm sorry that we had to talk on a day today where we're talking about the great Charlie O'Connell, who passed away this week. He was a skater's skater, and he was probably one of the best in the original roller derby. Don't you agree?
I've known so many, and of course, going back to when I first saw roller derby at the fairgrounds in Portland at 6 years of age, and saw the Atkinsons and Bogash and the others, but nobody dominated the game the way that Charlie did, and he is missed.
Jerry, are any of the Derby games on television anywhere at all? Any of the Derby games that you did?
Yes, actually. Write this down, please. If you go to www.metvnetwork.com, they have 18 games from the 1973 season.
Oh, nice.
18 hours. Of course, a lot of them Charlie are on, and it's not on MeTV Network itself, but you
online.
Can pick up the games, and they're great. Also, I highly recommend anybody goes online, either with Kindle or ebook, and get Frank DeFord's marvelous book, which has finally come out on as an ebook, 5 Strides on the Bank Track, and you'll see what the game was like and what Charlie was like and everything. It's really a great thing, and I also have to mention what you have meant to roller derby during all these years, and top flight announcer, which I hope sometimes the people in Salem with Cherry City will let you do something and help them. I'd
love to do it again.
Sometimes there's a funny thing about, well, that's the old roller derby. Yeah, it was the good roller derby.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they invited me down there. I went down there, and it was hilarious, Jerry, is that they had no clue that I had done roller derby before. And they did the first half, and the girl looked at me, and she says, okay, now, you want to try the second half? And I go, sure, okay. She goes, now, don't be shy if you don't know what you're doing. I go, I'll try. I'll give it my best. And, of course, I sat there, and I turned it on, Jerry. She looked at me and said, you've done this before, haven't you? I go, yeah, a little bit. And they never called me back. I was like, oh, well.
Well, it's an amateur thing. God bless them for keeping the game alive, and they have to sacrifice to do it. It's very expensive for them. Maybe someday we'll bring a professional game back with sufficient funding and all to pay the skaters and pay the officials. So I love Cherry City. I mean, they really are a very good league.
Good. Jerry, my friend, it is always a pleasure to talk to you, and I can't wait for you to come up this summer so we can go have some lunch. And stay online. We'll talk to you in just a minute.
Okay, and when is your next live appearance as a comedian? I don't think a lot of people know about that.
I'm doing something next week. Is it next week? I think we're doing something next week. I'm not sure. I'll post it on our website, which is what we do.
And if you'll send it to me, I'll gladly put it out to my 10,000 friends and followers.
Oh, now we're talking. All right. Hang on line for just a second, Jerry. Thank you, my friend.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Jerry Seltzer, who was the promoter of the original roller derby back in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s. And, of course, we were talking about the passing of the great Charlie O'Connell.